Hello, team players! It's time for the fourth build in my creature trap party. But before that, I do want to give you guys a basic idea of the team strategy behind this creature trap party. We essentially want to lead our enemies into a trap. Essentially, we want our Necromancer to summon as many thralls as he can so that they're overwhelmed by the number of thralls. Our Runesmith will buff those thralls, and our rogue will use the thralls to get flanking, which means sneak attack. And this build will allow us to trap enemies in this situation, as well as do a bunch of damage to them at once. As for each build individually, our Necromancer will be able to cover our burst and our multi-target damage thanks to bombs and blowing up their thralls. It will also somewhat allow us to do single target DPR, because one of our thralls will be able to attack every round, assuming we make thralls every turn. Our Necromancer will also be able to cover different defenses, mostly AC and reflex saves when it comes to damage. And we'll be able to cover different damage types thanks to bombs. And of course, being an intelligence-based class means that we can focus on intelligence-based recall knowledge skills very effectively. And if we get enough thralls on the field, we can cover action economy manipulation as well. Mainly due to dead weight, but also if we get enough thralls around an enemy, they have to take out at least one enemy in order to even move at all. And finally, our Necromancer will cover our out-of-combat healing due to Elixirs of Life. As for our Runesmith, that will cover single target DPR with their bow, and any runes we make. And we'll be able to make runes for different types of elemental damage and change them, which covers our damage types for the entire party, really. They'll also be able to cover our buffs due to, again, runes on our weapons, and some debuffs. And finally, again, we will be able to cover our intelligence-based recall knowledge skills with this class as well, because again, intelligence-based. Our rogue will definitely be able to cover single target DPR, as that's one of the main points of our rogue builds. Our rogue will also be able to cover one thing we haven't been able to cover, really, and that's will saves, as well as other saves at higher levels. Our rogue is also our debuffer and action economy and manipulation, because we will be doing things like stunning, tripping, and grappling. And finally, this build. This build will definitely cover our burst and our multi-target damage, as well as some single target DPR. The second thing they'll definitely cover is action economy manipulation, with spells like Slither and Wall of Flesh. We'll also be able to cover some different damage types, but mostly fire and cold damage. This is also where we'll get our burst healing with the Soothe spell. And of course, our charisma-based skills, as well as some buffs and debuffs. But the three most important things here are going to be our burst healing, our burst and multi-target damage, as well as our action economy manipulation. Those are going to be our main things we want to do with this build. Of course, our ancestry is the chameleon gnome, which means that if we're in the right area, we can get +2 on stealth checks, which is going to help out with our action economy and manipulation. Since all of our spells don't require us to speak at all, this effectively means that enemies have to look for us in order to stop us from manipulating their action economy. Assuming, of course, that we roll a high on stealth. But that +2 is going to help. And you may have already figured this out, but we're going to be building a psychic today. And we're going to be going with the Oscillating Wave Conscious Mind, which will help us with our damage types and our damage. Specifically, our burst damage and our area damage. Although we won't really be able to do much area damage in this build because of our limited spell slots, as we do want to focus on the action economy manipulation as well. And for our subconscious mind, we rolled emotional acceptance, which does give us charisma as our main casting stat, which is why we can cover the charisma-based skills. We also get the Restore the Mind ability, which means whenever we unleash our psyche, we can do a little bit of burst healing and 2+ double our level, which doesn't sound like much, but can really help. We can also buff our allies' defenses against mental effects, which of course does cover our buff side of this build. As for ability modifiers, we don't really need strength at all for this build, as well as intelligence or wisdom, but we will need dexterity for our defense and constitution for our HP. And obviously we're going to need charisma for our spell attack rolls and DCs, which of course will help us with two of the main things we want to do with this build, which is burst and multi-target damage and action economy and manipulation. For our first ancestry feat, we're going to go with First World Magic. This gives us a cantrip from the primal list, which basically means we can pick a cantrip that does different damage besides fire or cold damage. We won't be able to use our focus spells to amp it, but at least we'll have a cantrip that can do an extra type of damage. So something like Acid Splash would be effective here. For our first class feat, we're going to go with Warp Space. Not only does this allow us to have more range on our spells, it also means as long as we have line of sight and line of effect, we can basically ignore cover with our spells. And since we're focusing on burst and multi-target damage, that's kind of a big deal, especially for multi-target spells. Then of course at level 4, it's Violent Unleash. Not only does this give us an extra type of damage we can do, but it's also multi-target damage. Granted, we are stunned to 1 as we use this, but we can hit multiple targets that are near us, which we don't want people near us, so being able to hit them for 2d6 force damage, big deal. For our level 5 ancestry feat, we're going to go with Animal Occlusionist. Since we are charisma-based, being able to use charisma-based skills on animals is pretty nice. We might even be able to avoid combats with animals if we use this. Next at level 6, we're going to take Parallel Breakthrough for Telekinetic Rend. We won't really have a side cantrip that will hit multiple enemies until level 10. So we need this until we get to that point. This will essentially allow us to hit a bunch of enemies with a side cantrip instead of having to use a spell slot. After all, as a psychic, we're not going to have many leveled spell slots, and we want to save those for action economy manipulation anyway. So we need something, a side cantrip, that can hit multiple enemies, even at this lower level. At level 8, we're going to take Whispering Steps. This effectively allows us to amp a cantrip to force an enemy to step in a direction of our choosing. So either towards a thrall, towards our rogue, or away from us. This won't provoke attack of opportunity because it is a step and it is forced movement. But this means we can force them to spend an action moving away or moving towards what they want to attack, which is action economy manipulation, because even a step takes an action. Obviously you can't make them like step off a ledge or into hazardous terrain or whatever, but we can move them into an area, like say into the blast radius of our Necromancer's Thralls, or into an area where our rogue can easily grapple them, or into a flanking position even. This is basically a once per day per enemy ability, but can be very, very helpful. For our level 9 ancestry feat, we're going with First World Adept. Invisibility is great for stealth, and I already talked about why stealth is good for this build, for our action economy and manipulation, and Revealing Light is going to help us if enemies try to go invisible on us. Since we want to overwhelm them with a bunch of thralls and a rogue, them becoming invisible is not a good thing. So, Revealing Light says, yeah, no more invisibility for you. And the last feat I'm going to cover in this video is Inertial Barrier. This one we're mostly going to want to use on ourselves to give us a little more resistance in situations where enemies are attacking us instead of our allies, since we don't have a champion or anything like that. Because we won't really be targeting our allies with our spells. But having resistance against damage is good. Melee attackers are not something we want to have to deal with in this build. So giving us resistance to their damage is going to be important here, even though we do have pretty decent HP for a psychic. Now, for spells, you're mostly going to want to focus on the Soothe spell, Slither, and any wall spells you have access to that are on the occult list, like Wall of Force, Wall of Flesh, Prismatic Wall, Chromatic Wall. that sort of thing. Remember that one of the main things we want to do with this build is trap enemies in with our Necromancer's Thralls and our Rogue. And those wall spells are going to help us do that. And Slither is going to help when our Rogue can't really grapple people. And of course, at the end of the day, we also want to do area damage to enemies. And in some situations, it's not really going to matter if we hit the Necromancer's Thralls, because they'll just make more. We do have to be careful about hitting our Rogue with those, though. So where we put those area of effect spells are going to be important. But that Slither will help the Rogue get more sneak attacks and debuff enemies, on top of action economy manipulation. So we definitely want that spell in our repertoire as soon as we can cast it, for sure. For your free archetype, pretty much any charisma-based caster will help you here. Sorcerer can give you more occult spells if you want them, and they can also give you spells from other lists, particularly Arcane or Divine. Bard can again give you more occult spells, but it can also really help with buffing. Although, if you're playing this with my Creature Trap party, then your Runesmith is going to help you with your buffing quite a bit. Summoner can give you a pet that can help protect you, and if you really want divine spells, you could go Oracle. But overall, any archetype that can give you spells that go off charisma is going to help a lot with the spells. And that's the builds. The compilation of all 4 of these builds will be up soon. And if you guys want a Google Sheet for this build, all the way up to level 20, you can definitely join my Patreon page to get it. That, my Discord server, as well as my social media are all in the description below. But if you guys want a basic idea of teamwork roles in this system, you can check out this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.